Welcome to part 3 of the RLD Basics tutorials. In this video, we're going to be covering data, field counts, field management, and data sets. If you're interested in how we got here, check out part 1 and 2 on our website. So, we're going to be concerned in this video with this panel on the project summary, data. So, let's talk a little bit about the field count, the records, and the data points. And let's start by going over to data sets over here on the left. So whenever you create a new project, you automatically get a default dataset. Don't worry about creating more or understanding anything about that right now. That's a little bit more advanced. For now, let's just click on our default dataset to start looking at the records and data points. So this middle part right here, this gray area, you'll notice it has a scroll bar up here and it starts with a record ID, and we'll see one record ID of 72. And then on the left, it'll become fairly obvious that we have some fields. And you'll notice, if you watch the last two parts, these are the fields that we created in our form. Really cool. So the thing that you're able to do here is you're able to explore the records that you put in using your forms. And we can start doing that by going ahead and dragging these fields into this area. So let me grab our activity. And if I remember right, our first activity was working out. There you go. And if I remember right, we also put in an amount of time. So let me drag that one over here as well. And we did it for 2 hours. You might have noticed on the last screen, we actually had 12 data points, even though there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fields on here. Well, that's because real-life data adds a whole bunch of metadata fields to your record to help you figure out any of the stuff you might not even know you wanted to do. So if you click on other fields here, you'll see a lot of that. Some of the more interesting ones are user email, user ID, and username. All the others are a little bit more advanced, so we'll just focus on these 3 for now. So if I go ahead and grab my user email and throw it over here, we'll see that the person who submit this record was, well, my email, jacob@reallifedata.net. And then if I grab my user ID, it shows my unique user ID, and I can even put in my username, which should come up as Jacob Rothfuss. Now, there's a whole bunch of other stuff you can do. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add in a whole bunch of records so we can do a little bit more exploring on the data sets. All right, as you can see, I've added a whole bunch of records into our data set. I even have the original one right here, record ID 72. And you'll notice a whole bunch of varying activities, a whole bunch of varying times. However, the user email has stayed the same since I used the same account to put it in. And likewise, the username is also the same. So let's look at what kind of stuff we can do now that we have a whole bunch of data in our data set. The first thing you might want to do is you might want to sort. So sort our activities or our time or record IDs. So let me go ahead and sort our activities. We'll see that I worked out a decent amount, worked quite a bit, spent a little time with friends, and read about as much as I worked out. If I go ahead and sort by time, I'll also notice that working was probably my most time-intensive activity with a top value of 7, and reading was my least intensive with a bottom value of 0.5. If I go ahead and say, hey, you know, this 5 right here, that isn't right. I didn't actually work for 5 hours that day. I worked for 6. I can go ahead and click on it, put in a new value, and click Save. Now I could also go ahead and delete one of these if I thought it was wrong. Say, oh, I remember this one specifically, working for 6 hours. That didn't happen. Now I can also do a couple things just housekeeping wise. Say I want to change the size of this time field because it's taking up too much space. I can go ahead and do this. There we go, a little bit more reasonable. I can also go ahead and delete fields from the top here, things like user ID that I might not be using. I can click this delete button. And there you go. That's most of the stuff that you can do here. Now I want to show you exporting up at the top here. So let's say you want to have this, for whatever reason, on an Excel spreadsheet, maybe to give to someone else, or a CSV file to run some programming on. Well, let me go ahead and click export, and we can select any file type we'd like, a CSV, a JSON, an Excel. I'm going to go ahead and select CSV since it's the default, and I'll click OK just to show you what this looks like. So there we go. It processes all of your records, and then when it's done, you click download. And there we go. Got a big one right up there with the name of my data set on it. So now that we know what it's like to look through our data set, let's go learn a little bit more about each one of these fields that we're looking at. So go to the left here and click on Field Management. Now, first thing we'll notice is that we have all 7 of the fields that we created in our form in the earlier episode, part 2. Now, if we look at time, activity, felt great, felt good, all of these fields have a source on them. And it's the same source, that one form that I mentioned, the mental health tracker app input that we made in part 2. You'll also notice that each one of these has a type to it. And you'll also note that this type corresponds to this little icon on the side of the field. So this one has a little number icon, this one has a text, and these have button click icons, and they correspond to these. These types will mean a little bit more once we get into calculations in the next episode. Speaking of calculations, you'll note that it tells us how many calculations each one of our fields shows up in. Likewise, it also shows us how many graphs they show up in, how many tables they show up in, and how many dashboards they show up in. Right now, they're all 0 because we created a new project and haven't done anything with calculations, graphs, tables, or dashboards. I'll revisit field management in later episodes and we'll see these numbers go up. I'm also able to search through my fields if I'm trying to find one specifically to learn what its type is or where it comes from. Say I do time, there we go. Go ahead and cancel my search results. I can also delete a field if I feel that it's no longer necessary as part of my project. Now, RLD tries to stop you from deleting fields that might break your entire project if they are gone. So I'll show you what happens when you click delete on something that has a source but doesn't appear in anything like calculations, graphs, tables, or dashboards. Deleting this will delete its source from form mental health tracker app input. I still like to delete it. Well, I still want it to be on that form, so I'm going to go ahead and click cancel, but you can imagine if we click yes, it's no longer part of the form, and it's deleted from your list of fields. All right, if I go back to project summary, we'll even see that I have 34 records, 408 data points, and we'll see my graph going up here as I put in more data points and records. So that has been part 3, everything about data as it pertains to each one of your projects. Our next part is going to be about calculations and a little bit more about field types.